Hello, everyone, and welcome to the introduction of the Skill Booster course. I am International Master Adarsh Tripathi, and I'd like to introduce my course, which is designed to cover the fundamentals that I've identified as essential through my experience coaching players all across all rating level and range. Having worked with a diverse group of students, I have compiled what I find to be the most important topics and discussion points that every player must know. These are also the concepts that, if you know, you should revisit regularly and revise these concepts to ensure overall improvement. So, in this course, we'll dive into not just one topic or one specific thing. We're going to talk about calculation, we're going to talk about strategy, and we're also going to be discussing endgames, ensuring a comprehensive, well rounded improvement. To reinforce these concepts, I've also included a test and a recap summary chapter where I will provide a quick and easy review of all the key points that I've covered in detail throughout the course. So imagine you have a tournament coming up, or if let's say you want to quickly revise whatever you have learned, you can just go to the recap chapter, watch like 40 minutes and maybe 45 minutes of video to get the basic idea, and just it will hit your brain certainly whatever you learned in the detailed videos. Now, who am I? I am, as I said, Adarsh Tripathi. I'm an international master, I'm a chess author and a coach. Over the years, I have competed and won multiple international chess tournaments. I have authored several courses, including The Art of Maneuvering for the Chess World. I have coached over 1,000 plus chess players, including national and state champions. I've worked extensively with Magnus Chess Academy, delivering lectures and contributing to a curriculum that impacts hundreds of players worldwide. Drawing from these experiences, I have developed a structured game plan that focuses on key lessons essential for improving your skill set, strength, and ultimately your rating in the long run. Now, what is the structure of this course? This course is designed to refine your chess fundamentals and provide a structured approach to improvement. The course is divided into four key sections, each covering essential areas that every player must master. The first chapter is dedicated to one of the most important things about chess. Without this, no matter how good you are, you won't be able to survive in a game of chess, and that is calculation. And not just tactics, not just one area of calculation. I will discuss within the course almost everything that you need to know about calculation. I will also discuss and draw from my personal experience, both as a player and a coach, what I find that people make mistakes and things like that. I will also discuss very briefly on how I think you should train when you're solving puzzles. I will talk about the difference between pattern recognition, and I will discuss the difference between that and um, actual visualization. In the calculation chapter, we will begin and cover calculation techniques. Now, there is no secret mantra. I'm going to mention the calculation techniques and methods that are applicable in certain use cases. There is no one unique like method that if you follow, certainly you will play like a grandmaster. No, what I want to make sure is what sort of methods are common and popular, and you can implement in specific cases. For instance, we're going to cover techniques like forcing moves, method of elimination, candidate moves. I'm also going to introduce and showcase my method that I call the simple method, which is just applying your intuition with logic and then assessing the move that it comes with. Next, that's not all. We will also discuss common calculation mistakes. I will showcase some of the mistakes people commonly make during their calculation. Then we'll do a puzzle training where I will actually be showcasing some examples and solve it and share my thoughts as to on how I solve those exercises. So you'll not only get author's perspective, but you'll also get a player's perspective. The second chapter is about strategy, and this section focuses on positional understanding and long term planning. It's divided into key concepts that every player must know. We're going to discuss with examples weaknesses, maneuvering, trading, minority and majority attacks, prophylaxis. So the next chapter after this, we're also going to cover endgames. I have selected three very important games with which I will be able to break down key practical endgames that you must know. Straight to the point and highly applicable to your games. The fourth chapter is about reinforcement and testing. To solidify what you have learned, we will wrap up with a test where um, I have handpicked some positions and it will help you assess your understanding. I will obviously also explain the answers in detail. And then, of course, like I said, we're going to do a quick recap in the final chapter, the summary chapter, making it easy to revisit key ideas anytime. And by following this structured approach, I really believe that you'll develop a well rounded skill set that will significantly improve your game. Without wasting further time, let's get started with the chess stuff. I know a lot of you are waiting for that. So let's begin with the key concept we'll be covering. Now, this is an example of the calculation training we'll be doing. In the first chapter of the course, I have covered calculation techniques, like I said, where and when to implement them, common tactical mistakes, and I reinforce these concepts with a set of tactical puzzles where I solve and explain my thought process. Take this position for example. How should white continue? How do you approach this position? The viewers can now pause the video and try and figure out the answer. I have discussed this in this course specifically in the first subtopic where I introduced a fundamental principle. Whenever you're in a position, especially of tactical nature, you should first look at CCTP. Wonder what CCTP is? It stands for checks, captures, threats, and pawn breakthroughs, especially and specifically in that order. These are what we call forcing moves. The most concrete options that you should consider were first, CCTP, checks, captures, threats, and pawn breakthroughs, forcing moves. Why? Because tactical solutions often involve one of these, and prioritizing them makes your calculation more structured and accurate. The thing about these lines are they are concrete in nature. So if it works, you will have to only look at one specific set of variation, one specific set of moves, because there's not a lot of cloudy behavior that can occur. Because again, when you play a move like a check, you're forcing your opponent to make a decision, and that's why forcing moves are so important, right? Because you get something concrete no matter what. This is just one of the calculation techniques we'll be working on. I'll also go in depth into concepts like candidate moves, how to generate them, what to consider, and when to narrow them down. Now let's apply CCTP and solve this position. This occurred in a game between Jan Christoph Duda against Anish Giri in the Meltwater Tour final chess24.com online event in 2022. Now, there are multiple checks here. Queen g4 check, rook g7 check, and of course queen g3 check. We can now, of course, eliminate queen g3 check. A quick look at queen g4 check also makes it seem that after queen g4, knight g4, black can capture the rook on c7, and here we don't really see anything interesting. Next comes up another check here, rook g7 check. And this might actually be interesting because after king into g7, we can follow up with a pawn check. So if we have somewhat these many set of checks available in the position, and considering how vulnerable the black king is, we really need to look for checks like these in the position. Why? Because after f6 check, the bishop will open up and possibly create some tactical opportunities. Because the problem right now is if you count material, which you should do first things when you look at a position, there is not much you have that really builds upon you just winning the game immediately. Like I said, this is a tactical position. So, considering the weak, vulnerable king, we ought to look for something forcing if and something sharp if we want to finish the game off, like I said, in just a few moves. I mean, you can take on c8, and this is, of course, a winning position for white nonetheless. But, of course, the goal is to find a tactical solution. Your opponent is threatening rook into c7, so they're offering a trade of rooks. Considering all of this, if you don't have any good checks, maybe it makes sense to trade off and play something else. But first, we got to consider rook g7 check. After the king captures, by the way, I might play the moves out on the board for presentation reasons, but like I've said in the course, try and visualize as far as possible. I will help you visualize by playing the moves out, but before that, see if you can visualize as much as possible without playing the move on the board. Why? Because you want to make sure we're not just training patterns, but also improving our visualization skills. Visualization can only be trained with practice, nothing else. After the king captures, white can play the move f6 check. My opponent has three moves: king g8, king h8, and king h6. And of course, there's actually four: rook into f6. You can immediately cut rook into f6 off because queen into f6 check comes. And even intuitively, you should realize since you have won the rook back, it should be not the move. Now, king h8 would not work because you have queen h5 check, another check in the position, and queen h7 checkmate. So, for instance, to showcase what I'm talking about, king h8. So, this was a check. We have another check in the position. Again, CCTP, but we have the most forcing moves out of them all, just all checks. This right here is checkmate. If the king goes to g8 in this position, white can play the move f7. Um, Actually, no, wait. We can actually play the move bishop h7 check. I stand corrected. We have another check in the position. If the black king captures, queen h5 check. Again, another check in the position. King g8, queen g6 check, king h8, and queen g7 checkmate. If the black king goes to h8, we can anyways play the move knight g6 check, another sequence. Again, you might think that this is all a bit too much, but if you improve your visualization skills and you follow CCTP, it should not be that difficult to find these variations. Why? Because they're very, very concrete, right? You're giving checks after checks after checks. And that's the beauty of forced moves. If the king captures the bishop, we can go queen h5 check, another check, king g8, knight e7 checkmate. So we know that king back to h8 and g8 do not work. So you'll have to go king h6. Can you guess the move here for white? That's correct. We know CCTP. We know queen f4 check is not the move. We see another check that might be interesting. It's knight g4 check. The poor black king has no square except the h5 and the g5 square on the fifth rank, which when they do occupy, white has a stunning little resource in the position. Using CCTP, can you figure out the beautiful sequence that will finish off your opponent? That's correct. We have another check sacrificing the queen, queen f5 check, knight into f5, rook into f5. If the king captures on g4, we have a pawn checkmate with h3. If the black king goes to g6, like what happened in the game, rook e5 check leads to checkmate. I mean, the queen can block this bishop, we'll capture the queen. If king f7, white will again pursue it with a check, another check, and then rook h7 checkmate. So, generally, a calculation involving 8 moves is going to be difficult. This exercise itself is difficult, but imagine how much it would have been difficult if things were not concrete. If, let's say, we had to calculate things like queen into e5, queen into d5, we just had to consider like a billion different variations. So that's why we first start by looking at forcing moves because they are concrete and it makes a calculation smoother and easier. I hope that makes sense. We will discuss other non obvious calculation methods in the course, of course, but no matter what, CCTP remains a priority in any given position. Please make sure you do consider CCTP. I'm not saying play it out, right? I'm just saying consider CCTP. Now, I have another very interesting example, which also reflects one thing that we'll cover in the course. We have a very interesting situation here. This is a game played between the legendary, the one and only Victor Korchnoi, playing against Van der Geert, international master from Belgium. Now, the great Korchnoi played the move Rook g6 in this position. A very powerful idea, very good looking move that threatens checkmate on h6 thanks to the bishop winning the g7 pawn. So, the point of this move Rook g6 is that, hey, wait a second, if there was no queen on e6 guarding this h6 pawn, I would just go queen into h6 and deliver a checkmate. But since there is a queen defending it, I will play the move Rook g6, threatening checkmate. And if you grab with the queen to defend your queen and to protect this pawn, I can just capture your queen and it's game over. If you capture with the pawn, now the queen's defense to the h6 pawn has been deflected, and I can just take on h6 with a checkmate. So once black saw this, they were like, "Oh my god, what a beautiful move by my opponent!" And he resigned on the spot. Korchnai's opponent trusted his opponent, and just resigned. And it makes sense, right? Right? No. Here's the catch. This is a classical example of one of the most common calculation mistakes that I've seen, and one that I've covered in the course. That is trusting your opponent's move at face value. I've showcased a few examples in this course where a player sees a surprise move from the opponent and automatically assumes it is correct, and in this case, it is winning, without verifying it for themselves. Big mistake. Here's a simple but crucial lesson. Always ask yourself, do I have any resources here? Any way to extend the game? Face the position, not the player. Remember that. Just because you're playing against a stronger opponent doesn't mean the tactic is correct. Like I said, don't take the moves at face value. Van resigned here after rook g6, falling into the exact psychological trap I'm talking about. But had he kept looking, he would have found a move that not only saved him from losing, but actually turned the game into his favor. That's the lesson part, right? Avoid looking at the opponent move in just face value. Evaluate your resources. Never surrender. Always, of course, ask yourself, do I have any resources? And it's very easy to go wrong when your opponent surprises you with a move that you didn't expect. So please, before you decide on a move or before you make any big decision, take a deep breath, calm down, and then start thinking again. Now, can you find the move here? Can you figure out why this is not just winning? Sorry, this is not only is this a position where black survives, so black wins. The move in this position, I hope you paused and tried figuring out the answer. Knight into e5, a brilliant move here. Basically, the point is, without the bishop on e5, there is no longer a pin on the g7 pawn. Which means, if you go rook into h6 check now, I can capture with my pawn and the rook opens up with a check. No issues here. Same thing goes with queen to h6. I can just grab with the pawn and everything is good to go. Oh, wait a second. Didn't rook g6 also attack this queen on e6? That's correct. And now if you capture that, there's d into e5, but here comes the twist. Black in this position has the option of going knight into d3. The key point as to why knight into e5 works. Basically, I defend, obviously the knight was hanging, and had I played f into e6, my opponent would just capture the knight on e5, which would mean that they have a queen for a rook, completely winning. But now when I capture the bishop on d3, first of all, I save my knight, which means that knight remains. Plus, I have captured another piece, which means I have two knights for the queen while the rook is hanging. But that's not it. I'm also threatening knight f4 check, which would fork the king and the queen, along with the e6 rook. You can't defend with all of these threats. You have to understand that as white, you're going to either lose your rook or your queen because the knight f4 check is quite a dangerous threat. If you capture the pawn on h6, I can capture on h6 with the pawn. This is not checkmate because my rook is now open and giving your king a check after the pawn moves. And that's not it. If you play a move like rook f6, the same thing happens here. Pawn captures is a check, yes, or else it would be a checkmate, but here this is game over. Black has two minor pieces and a rook for the queen, which is quite overwhelming. And this is what I mean. The reason why Korjunai went wrong was because the reason why Vander went wrong was because he considered this position at the face value, right? I hope that makes sense. Let me now show the next position, which is about strategy. So I covered a bunch of things in the calculation chapter. I will try to briefly summarize some of the concept I've showcased throughout the course. I have to keep some for the course itself. Now, moving on to strategy, the first subtopic I covered was weaknesses. Weaknesses is a foundational concept in chess strategy. Weaknesses are vulnerable squares or pieces that one side aims to occupy or pressure, provided they have a realistic chance of doing so. What I mean is, if there is a weak or vulnerable square that exists, but realistically you can't really take advantage of it, then it's not really a proper weakness. A potential weakness, maybe. A weakness, no, not so much. For a weakness to be weakness, it needs to be exploitable, either by the means of you occupying it or you putting pressure on it. Now, as I said, I find weaknesses to be like a foundational concept in chess strategy. Why? Because a lot of the positional chess concepts we know, like maneuvering, and a lot of a decision, let's say, for instance, when we're deciding to trade or not, we actually consider things like weaknesses in all of these concepts. So it's like a universal concept that defines to a certain degree the game of chess. In the section of weaknesses, I discussed in the course exactly what weaknesses are, how to exploit weaknesses, what to consider if you have weaknesses, and the principle of two weaknesses, all illustrated with examples. I would like to quickly mention this. If you have a weakness, look for ways to either neutralize that weakness. Maybe you can trade something off, maybe you can push that weakness. So look for ways to neutralize the weakness. If that's not possible, try going for immediate direct counterplay, right? So if, let's say, you strategically worse your weaknesses, you have a lot of them, then maybe it's not your time to play the game positionally. Then what should you do? Try and create some counterplay, some dynamic chances in the game. Now, I also said the principle of two weaknesses. Let me demonstrate that with this example. The principle of two weaknesses is simply, if there is a weakness on one side of the board, what happens multiple times and many times is your opponent goes all in defending that particular weakness. When they do that, you want to try and strike on the other side of the board, making it very, very difficult for your opponent to handle both the weaknesses. Like, they have weakness on this side, they'll have weakness on the other side. It will just get overwhelming and they will eventually crash out. In this position, what are the weaknesses, or what is the weakness in your opponent's position? It's clear that black's b6 pawn is a clear vulnerable piece. It's a weakness. Why? Because it is something you can target, and it's not easy for your opponent to fix this weakness, right? It is undefended, unprotected, and white has realistic chances of occupying this weakness, or at least we can put pressure on it, making it a weakness. You can call the c6 square also a weakness, but it's a potential weakness, not exactly a weakness at the moment. Why? Because there is no realistic way for you to occupy this square right now. Additionally, some of the dark squares are weak thanks to the fianchetto of the black bishop, but this is extremely common and you can't really take advantage of these weaknesses. So we're not counting it right now. White played, of course, how do you, when you find a weakness and you have nothing better to do, what do you really do? That's correct. You strike at that weakness. White played the move. This is a game between two grandmasters, Joël Lothier from France against Ruslan Punamirov, former world champion, who now represents, I believe, the Ukraine flag. This was played in 1999, and rook a b1 attacks the pawn on b6, of course, targeting the clear weakness. You spot a weakness, look for ways to put pressure on it. Black played rook a b8, and white plays the move rook b3, intending on doubling up on the b file. Black plays the move f5, attempting to create some sort of counterplay. But what's the drawback of this move? That's correct, it further weakens this e6 square. Again, the e6 square is not really an immediate weakness, but it is a potential weakness. Now, think about potential weaknesses. Is that your action plan won't really consist of occupying this square right away because that's very unrealistic. However, you would look for ways to occupy it if and when the opportunity opens up. In many cases, that actually happens if your opponent doesn't play the most accurate move. In the meanwhile, our target was this b6 pawn, so we double up to target and attack this pawn on b6. In case you're wondering why is the opponent not grabbing this pawn on a4, please understand the bishop is the sole protector of the dark squares near the king. Doing so would make sure that without the bishop, all of your dark squares and pawns will fall apart. There you have to worry about moves like bishop h6, and all of this trouble is clearly not worth a pawn. Black played the very sad move knight a8, defending the pawn on b6. Look what your opponent has to do to protect the weaknesses. But like I said, when there is one weakness in the position, oftentimes your opponent goes all in trying to defend that weakness. With that being said, can you figure out the move here for white? In this position, white played the very surprising move h4. Why? Because white is saying, you know what? Just because you have went all in defending the queen side and you fully intend on going all in. Like for instance, if you play a move like a5, I might just sacrifice the pawn, double up on b8, and just try and win this pawn next. So you have ideas involving the b pawn because you're going all in. Like your knight is on a8, literally on the worst possible square, on the absolute corner. Um, but you clearly intend on doing something there, defending there. So what do? I strike on the other side of the board. The point is, I want to play h5 to strike against your king side pawn structure, and I might reroute my pieces towards the king side, targeting this pawn on h5 if you do insist upon capturing it. Black didn't like this idea of h5 and they played the move h5. White played the move a5, black played the move queen c6. I mean, a5 was just begging to be played, but black defends it. Like I said, it's very difficult to do something over here with the b6 pawn because your opponent has done a fantastic job going all in defending this. However, white didn't really intend on doing or winning anything on the queen side in the first place. Yes, you're threatening the pawn on a5, I know, but what you don't know is in the middle of the chaos, to defend the queen side, you have now left your king side unattended. And like we know in the principle of two weaknesses, when your opponent covers one end of the board, you have tried attacking and they have gone all in defending that weakness. We move on and shift our focus to the other side of the board. We either create weaknesses there or try and take advantage of the weaknesses that already exist here. What are the weaknesses here? The g6 pawn is one clear target. It's a weak, vulnerable pawn, unprotected. And so is the e6 square now because there is no knight defending it, and we actually have a realistic plan to take over that square. Can you figure out the move in this position? Like I said, when there is a weakness, we generally like to occupy or put pressure on that weakness. The way to do that is maneuvering, something which we'll cover next in the course and after weaknesses. But maneuvering is simply rerouting your pieces to a better square. Here, the knight on c3 isn't doing much. We talk that the piece is just there, not really doing much, not bringing any impact to the game. So what do? We tell that piece, hey, maybe I can shift you around to target these weaknesses. How do you do that? That's correct, knight e2. Black goes b into a5, but while you were focused on the shenanigans on the queen side, my knight jumps to f4, targeting this pawn, targeting this e6 square. If you try defending it with the king, you'll be in a lot of trouble because knight will jump to e6 directly. Black played the move rook b4 and white played the move rook e1, pointing out, hey, you know what? If you trade, I will capture, and suddenly I want to strike against your king over with queen e8 check. And that's a lot of trouble because it also will hang the g6 pawn with a check. If you play upon a move like queen f7 here, I will simply reroute my rook again to reinforce the pressure on the king side. Notice how suddenly we just shift from putting pressure on the queen side to the king side, and that right there is the principle of two weaknesses. Black played the move queen f7, and here comes the brilliant move rook e6, taking over this weak and vulnerable square on e5. Finally, the square that I called a potential weakness is now a full weakness because, again, like you can see, we have successfully occupied it. The pawn on g6 is hanging. Black played the move rook into c4. And of course, if you're dominating your opponent strategically, oftentimes what happens is you get tactical chances. Strategy and tactics, they're both correlated. White to play. Can you find the move? White plays the move rook b7, getting the rook to the 7th rank where they belong, and deflecting the queen on f7 from the rook on e8. Black played queen into b7, rook into e8 check, king h7, and the rook gets to the 7th rank, pinning this bishop on g7. Black gave a check, king h2, but your king being so weak means that none of this, whatever you're doing on black's territory, on white's territory with black, is going to do anything. We're threatening bishop f6, winning the bishop. Black played rook c2, white played the move queen e3, and to prevent bishop f6, they played the move queen b2, but then again, their weaknesses that we talked about finally come under scrutiny once again with queen e6. Threatening queen on g6 check, and of course, this is too much to handle. Bishop f6 is also a threat that cannot be stopped now, and with that, Ponomirov resigned. So, this game was decided on the basis of a weakness which, when we focus, led to our opponent defending that weakness. And when that happened, we strike on the other side of the board. And that right there is the principle of two weaknesses. Something we'll also look at in the course. All right. Now, trading and what else? There's more. Not just weaknesses. I will also consider a bunch of different things apart from that. I will showcase maneuvering. I will consider trading. And I will also showcase and break down the three most important rules to consider before exchanging pieces. The three rules are, first of all, don't trade just for the sake of trading. Oftentimes, what players do is they see a trade, and just because it's so easy and instinctive, they go for that trade. No, that's absolutely incorrect. Make sure your trade has a purpose and you're doing it for a reason. Don't just trade for the sake of trading. The second point, the second rule, is to always evaluate the position before and after the trade. So take a screenshot of the position before the trade and take a screenshot of the position after the trade. Compare the two of the positions in your head. Look at the short term evaluation, the long term evaluation, and just get a picture of what will happen before if you don't go for the trade and after if you go for a trade. That should generally give you a clear indication on whether or not you should do a trade. If it's unclear, we will, of course, then you should consider the third rule, which is to analyze the individual elements of the position. What are the individual elements? You got to talk to yourself and ask which piece is superior, mine or my opponent's. Then you got to ask yourself, hey, if I go for the trade, how does the pawn structure change? Who benefits from the change of the pawn structure? You got to ask yourself, if I go for the trade, are there new weaknesses that get created? You got to also ask yourself, hey, who benefits more from the trade, both positionally and dynamically? And also, you should consider what's the short term and long term impact. All of these sound very difficult, but you can just summarize it in one simple way. That is, before trading, you should analyze details in depth. What sort of changes will occur in the game? You got to consider that and see if it actually suits you. Don't, like I said in rule number one, trade for the sake of trading. I will recap. The first rule is don't trade just for the sake of trading. Always evaluate the before and after the trade. And if the step two doesn't give you clarity, analyze the individual positional elements in your position. Trading should never be a guess, it must be a calculated decision. So we have covered weaknesses, we'll cover then maneuvering, we'll cover trading, then we'll cover minority and majority attacks, breaking them down with practical examples. And of course, to wrap up the strategy chapter, we move on to the topic I truly value and love, prophylaxis. Now, prophylaxis. Let's take a few seconds to discuss what prophylaxis really is. I have emphasized this throughout the course. This is the most important question in chess. Look, chess is not a one player game, it's a battle between two minds, two players. Your opponent is just as important as you, sometimes even more. Now, a great boxer isn't just someone who can throw punches. They're someone who can anticipate their opponent's moves, dodge them, and then counterattack. And that's exactly what prophylaxis is. Prophylaxis is identifying your opponent's ideas and plans, assessing whether they're worth stopping. If they are, just find ways to prevent them. Now, this is the single most important question you should ask yourself in every position. What does my opponent want? If you had to ask me, hey Adarsh, if you only had to ask one question, if you could ask only one question, or if let's say we have an AI, but you can only ask one question to it, except of course, what's the best move? What will you ask? I will say, hey, I just need to understand what my opponent wants. Tell me what my opponent wants. So the important question you should always ask is again, what does my opponent want? You should also ask yourself similar question, are there any specific ideas or moves I should watch out for? And of course, if I play my move, how will my opponent react? Like I said, your focus in any given position should be about what your opponent wants. Right now or after the move you play, evaluate all of that beforehand. Always focus on your opponent's move first before deciding what to play. Make sure you're looking at the game from the perspective of your opponent. Anticipate, react, and then control the game. Here's a simple example, very short and sweet, very simple, like one move example. From the game of Grandmaster Peter Swidler against the legendary author and great teacher Arthur Yusupov. Arthur played the move 97. I'm going to give you a very simple, elementary example of prophylaxis. Black played 97. How should white react here? Pause the video, figure it out. Hint, try to understand what black really wants. Like I said, it's a one move exercise. We will cover more detailed, elaborate prophylaxis in the course, but to just showcase a point and prove very simple concept of prophylaxis, the prophylactic move in this position is the very simple Queen D2. As simple as that. Look, black's bishop on e7 is quite passive, and they'd like to trade this off with the white bishop on f4, which is controlling a nice long diagonal. Exactly what bishops want. They want to control long and nice diagonals. So black wants to trade it off, and you're like, no. Yes, long term, I want to go b4, a4, b5, strike on the queen side, but I won't rush with any of that. I will first prevent this from happening. Because if your opponent plays a move like h6, they might open up some tactical sacrifices, so it's not really easy for them to pursue this trade again. In the game, black had to just say, okay, the bishop is bad, it's also restricting my rook and my queen, so they had to take the uh, unfortunate decision of putting the bishop on f8. Clearly, they would have loved to trade off their passive bishop with a good bishop. And so with the move queen d2, we just simply avoided it altogether. We'll, of course, see, as I said, crazier long term prophylactic moves, but the foundation of the concept remains the same, exactly as this one move defines. Identify your opponent's plan and stop it before it happens if it is worth it. This simple principle, if you're not doing already, you can start applying right away. Now, what else? So, prophylaxis is going to be the final strategic topic before we shift gears to endgame. From here, we'll analyze three handpicked endgame examples, each highlighting the most important and must know practical endgame principles and concepts. I'm emphasizing the word practical because that's really where your real game improvements come from. While, and don't get me wrong on this, theoretical endgames are extremely crucial, they're extremely important, but my priority throughout the course remains to equip you with the knowledge, and in this case, endgame knowledge, that you will directly be able to apply from your game. This will ensure you're able to improve faster and efficiently. If you think that's the end of the course, no, it's not. That's not the end of the course. You'll also take a test after the endgame chapter where I'll quiz you on all the concepts, covered, of course, with fully explained answers. Is that the end? No, that's not all. I've also included short but detailed summary videos for each chapter. And these are really designed to help you quickly revise key ideas without having to go through the full explanation, the long explanation, the in-depth explanation again and again. So if you're just in a mood for quick refresh, or if you're maybe going for a tournament, maybe you came out of a long break and just want to reinforce this concept, or just because, let's say, you just want to go through the concepts within like tip of your hand, you will be able to use the summary chapter to reinforce all the concepts easily. I think that's actually a very short but very useful chapter of the course. Now, what are my final thoughts? Well, first of all, thank you for following along with this introduction. This was quite an ambitious project covering the essential concepts that every player needs. Again, it was ambitious and not at all easy. Breaking down calculation, showcasing strategy with 20 plus fully explained examples, not just, hey, we played this, but rather going in depth, helping you understand, asking you questions, and reflecting upon them along with endgame principles took a lot of effort. And I am not going to lie, it took genuinely quite a lot of effort. But I'm also extremely proud of the result. I encourage you to go through the course in its entirety. I'm not just saying that because it's my course, but I actually think by the time you finish, I really, really believe you will feel a noticeable improvement in your game and gain a deeper understanding of chess. Again, no exaggerations. And I promise what I'm saying is the absolute truth. While recording this course, even I found myself reinforcing concepts I had not focused on in a while. This is a promise. After creating this course, I feel more confident in my own strategic knowledge than before. So that is something. Like, for instance, the pawn majority and pawn minority was a very quick, simple um, subtopic. But some of the things that I talked about, even I knew back of my mind, but it wasn't something that I really used to actually, think about. But now that I've again revisited that part of the concept, I'm like, whoa, that makes so much sense. That's correct. I've completely. It was intuitive, but it wasn't really something that was um, theoretical in my mind. So, I mean, it might sound like I'm exaggerating, but trust me, I'm not. Again, that's something. So let's now dive in and start improving. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope to see you inside the course. Thank you, and bye bye.